You have to know how to draw everything, and you have to draw it from different angles, and you know how to draw highs and lows and worm eye views and all sort of stuff. However, in your first job, don't think that that's what you have to do when you're doing the boards.
Oh, right.
What I did, and it's a classic mistake that I see happening time and time and time again, you overboard. I drew like I was a comic book artist. Every panel had to be different because you wanted to keep the reader's attention. However, in film, you don't do that because that's going to drive everyone up the wall because then it's like, oh, set up over here, blah, blah, blah. Too much.
True.
Welcome to Beyond the Process and another edition of the Storyboard Roundtable, where each month we choose a topic to discuss with our panel of live-action storyboard artists. I'm your host, Lance Laspina, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host and Danny DeVito stunt double, Mr. Shane Patrick White. Our aim, as with every show, is that the discussion that you hear today, we hope that it's going to inform you on your own storyboarding journey, no matter where you are in that process. Okay. Now let's meet our panel that's joining us today. Our first guest is already making his third appearance on the show, so he's become quite the staple so far. And trust me, I think he's been doing this longer than it took the Egyptians to build the pyramids of Giza. That's a long time, folks. So please, let's all give another nice return welcome to Mr. Mark Simon.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. Always
Welcome,
fun
Mark.
to hang out.
All right, our next guest, he's making his second appearance on the show, and I guess you could consider him sort of a time traveler because he's joining us from the other side of the world, from Sydney, Australia, where it's already tomorrow. So I might have to take advantage of the situation, get some stock tips, maybe some sports scores that I could bet on. We'll see how accommodating he is. Let's please give another big warm welcome to Mr. Mark Sexton. Mark, welcome back to the show.
Hello, and don't come here. It's scary. Don't look outside.
Is it true that everything in Australia is trying to kill you?
It already has. We're all zombies now.
All right, our third and final guest. He's joining us for the very first time. He has worked on shows such as Deadpool 2, The Game of Thrones, and Supergirl. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Jeremy Simser to the show. Jeremy, welcome.
Everybody, hi. Thanks for having me. I didn't realize I was the only first time around here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's good to have you. Okay, so today's topic, we're going to have our panel of guests discuss their first gig, how they landed that first gig, and perhaps what they did to prepare for whenever they had to show up for work for the first day. And once we've finished listening to everyone's stories, we're then going to ask our panelists to give their best advice to those of you out there who are looking to land your very first storyboarding gig. So we're going to get things kicked off with Mark Simon. And as I mentioned, Mark has been doing this for such a long time. I'm not even sure what kind of technology was available back then. Mark, had the telephone been invented yet, or are we still working on like Morse code? Or
Well, there was no internet when I got started. So, yeah, I mean, my story starts back in the 80s. So, yeah, God, you're making me feel old. I feel great, but you're making me feel old. So I do blame you for that. I got my start in working in Hollywood as an art director at Roger Corman's studio. I actually became an art director on my first film, first project I worked on. And so I did that for a number of years and was production designing a bunch of stuff. But I missed drawing. In college, when I studied film, I'd storyboarded some of my own things. I didn't really know anything. There really weren't any books on storyboarding out at the time. I wanted to draw again. I really missed illustration. I mean, all of us are illustrators. And I mean, it's a thing I have to do it. I'm sure you do too. I mean, it's just like, if I'm not doing anything else, I'm drawing.
Sure.
So being that I was living in LA, I looked around and Storyboards Inc. was the largest agency in the world at the time. And I knew about them because they were right around the corner from Corman's studio. And when I was looking at them, I was actually working at HBO at the time. I was designing and building the sets for an O.J. Simpson series called First and 10. I don't know if you remember that. I mean, again, this is the late 80s. O.J. was the manager of a football team that was owned by a woman. And it was a TNA series. So I literally drove over to Storyboards Inc. and I just walked in. And I asked to speak to one of the agents. Guy sat down with me. I showed him some samples, and he just shook his head. He goes, "Everything's wrong." I said, "Oh, really?" He goes, "Yeah." He said, the nothing in here is what we do for production. I said, so show me examples of what's the right way. And he gave me some of their half-page sheets that they use to promote other artists by Tim Burgard. Most of us are friends with Tim. And explained a couple things to me and shushed me out. The next Friday, I showed back up again, unannounced, and I had new samples. Showed it to him. He goes, "Well, it's better. It's still not good." And he gave me samples of someone else. I don't remember who it was, and threw me out. The next Friday, I showed back up again with new samples. And I just kept doing it. I showed up every Friday with new samples until he looked at it and went, "Yeah, it looks pretty good. Want to do a Honda commercial?" And put me on a Honda commercial. So, showing up, taking notes, and showing back up is huge. Most people don't do that. I mean, most of us probably get calls from people who want to be story artists, and I'm sure we never hear from almost any of them ever again because they don't like to hear any criticism. So I took that experience, and because I was working at HBO, I called for a meeting with the exec. He took it. I sat down with him. I said, "Look, I'm on your show. You're paying for me anyway. If you need any storyboards, let me do them for you." And he said, "Never thought about it. Thanks for bringing that to my attention." And a week later, he calls me, and he calls me into his office. So I go in, and we sit down, and he hands me a script. And he said, "We're doing this script in about 2.5 months. It's supposed to be scary, funny, and it's not scary at all. Can you make this scary?" And I did the smartest thing anyone ever does in Hollywood. I said yes without knowing what the hell I was talking about.
Boy.
And he said, "So how do you charge for storyboards?" And back then, for commercials and things, it was always by the panel is how we were charging. So I just wanted to get it, and I was getting paid full time anyway. So I just said $5 a panel. I had no idea what the per panel rate was.
Sure.
And he said, "Tell you what, if I use them, I'll give you double what you're asking." And he sent me off. So I drive back home, and I just gotten engaged to a woman I met on that HBO production. And we're still married after all these years. And I told her, I said, "All right, we're going to be up all night. Let's go down to the corner video shop." And I said, "Let's rent every horror movie we can find and write down all the tropes that we see. And then I'm going to read and I'm going to rewrite the script." And so we did. We stayed up till 2 or 3 in the morning. She went to bed, and I started rewriting the script to add horror tropes into it. I did a quick pass of storyboarding the horror elements, the cabin in the woods type of thing, right? So those segments is what I rewrote. And the exec looked at it and goes, "A lot of this is good. Here, think about this. I don't like this." And I went through and I did a second pass, and he liked it and said, "Well, I'll let you know what I haven't even told the director I'm doing this. So if he decides to use it, I'll give you twice what you asked for." And they ended up using my boards and using the sequences that I rewrote. And that gave me my first big TV credit and got me on my way. And the exec was good. I got paid for my time designing, and I got twice what I had asked for the storyboards.
Did you get any writing credit on top of that or no?
Do we ever get writing credit as story artists?
Yeah, dumb question.
I mean, granted, story is literally in our job title. It should not be a shock to anyone that we write, because that's literally what we're doing. But of course not. No.
That's a great story, though. You were very persistent, which I think is a good lesson to everyone out there who's might be trying to break in on their own. If you want to be in this business, you have to take it seriously, right, Mark? I mean, you can't just
it's a business.
Yeah, exactly. So no,
you
did the
hustle,
right thing.
essentially.
You got to hustle, and you got to show up.
Yeah.
You just got to keep showing up.
Fantastic. Mark Sexton, I think you have a fun little story that you'd like to tell us. Is that true?
Well, no, it's not true at all. It's terribly boring. Everybody go have a pillow. It's going to be fantastic. We're going to get some great sleep. No, actually, my story is almost diametrically opposed to Mark's, which is that I did absolutely no preparation at all. But I came to storyboarding by a highly circuitous route because I didn't even know it existed. And I grew up on a little island in the middle of the South Pacific. We didn't have television. We didn't have a cinema. So I didn't grow up watching anything. I had very little experience in films and stuff like that. So it never even occurred to me that you could work in the industry. Love to draw. I failed art at school. My teacher hated what I did. So I couldn't go on doing art in any professional capacity, I thought. So when I finished school, I went and did a PhD in genetics, or I did genetics. Ended up doing a PhD. But while I was at university, I started drawing my own comic book because I realized that the university newspaper had this really terrible comic strip in it, and I thought I could probably do better. So I did it with a friend, and it wasn't any better, but they took it and published it anyway. And that turned into myself and this friend of mine doing comic books while I was doing this PhD. This is going somewhere. And then the comic books were being distributed nationwide. This is in the 90s, so not quite the 80s. We're distributing these comics around Australia and got a little bit of attention. And we got a gig from this band in Australia, infamous band called Tism. This is Serious Mum, who asked us to do a couple of comic books for them. And they were well received. Well, the first one was, but the second one got us banned nationwide.
Congratulations.
Yeah, good job.
That's awesome. Which meant, and that was just after I'd quit my PhD. I was thinking, I'm going to do this comic book thing full time and I'm going to make a career out of it. This is all pre-internet as well, so there's no digital distribution and anything like that. It's all physical. And then we got banned nationwide and no distributors would touch us. And so the comic book industry for us collapsed overnight and we had to go, oh, what are we going to do now? And I literally had $100 in the bank, had to pay the rent, didn't have much money for food. And I'm sitting there just going, shit. And then I got a phone call. And the phone call was from a producer up in Sydney. I was in Melbourne at the time. He was in Sydney. There was a guy called Andrew Mason. And he was producing a film called Dark City. And he rang me and said, hi, have you ever thought about storyboarding? I went, no. He said, well, the director, and Alex Price, he's a Tism fan. And he picked up your comic book. And he's just broken his old storyboard artist and needs a new one. And he liked the look of your stuff and thought that you might be interested in doing storyboarding for film. And I went, no, not really. And he went, yeah, I mean, we're paying $1,000 a week. And I went, oh, okay, I'll be there tomorrow. So I packed my bags and drove up to Sydney, which is 600 miles. Got there and went, okay, what do I do? I had with absolutely no idea what I was doing, none whatsoever. And I had a meeting with the director and he gave me a script and I went and he said, have a look at what the previous storyboard artist did. The previous storyboard artist was Peter Pound, who'd done probably his career on Dark City. So I sat there and looked at the storyboard. As Mark says, you just say yes to everything. I can do that. And then I proceeded to go off and found one book on the making of Jurassic Park, which had David Lowery's storyboards in the back. That was the only storyboards I could find other than Peter Pound's. And that was my reference for storyboarding. And I proceeded to spend 6 months on that film making every mistake that you could ever make in storyboarding. Overboarded everything. No idea what I was doing.
Crossed the 180 several times, probably.
Everything. At least 4 times in every sequence. And then went home thinking, oh, well, that was a nice experience. I guess I'll never do that again. And then I got called up by George Miller's producer and said, we hear that you can storyboard. Would you like to come back to Sydney? And I haven't got around to leaving yet. So, yes. Anyway, it was a circuitous route. So get banned and get into the film industry.
That's your best advice.
Can I ask real quick, like, what got you banned that was so bad?
Well, TISM were a band that was big on irony. In order to have fun with irony, you need to understand irony. And the second comic that we did, they wrote. And TISM's whole stick was, we will sabotage everything we do in order for it to succeed despite our best efforts. That was what they did. And so their second comic was basically an exercise in that we're going to make this a anti-drug comic that's cunningly disguised as a pro-drug comic, but you need to read a little bit in order to understand that. And let's just say the powers that be got to page 3 and looked at the line saying, "Take drugs, kids, did me no harm," and yes, it got pulled off the shelves within 24 hours of being distributed, and we got a very hearty slap over the wrist, and don't do that again, boys. And yes,
that's amazing.
I mean, it didn't help that on page 4, if you turn the page, was the member of TISM injecting himself in the back of the throat with heroin and then having a really, really, really horrible time. You needed to get to page 4, and they didn't.
But I've never even dropped an anvil on my head, and how many times have I seen that with the animations I've watched growing up?
So what was the connection, Mark, between Alex Proyas's producer and George Miller's producer? Were they friends? Is that how?
Very small industry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tiny industry. I'm in Sydney. Very small industry. Everybody knows everybody else. And this is the mid-90s, 96. And there were very few storyboard artists here because there was a couple who did advertising, but not many people doing films because there wasn't a huge raft of films being done here. So probably there would have been about 3 or 4 people doing storyboards on any regular basis.
Oh, wow.
But Australian films don't tend to use a lot of storyboarding. So it was only these runaway productions coming from the States that were hiring locals to do storyboards.
Yeah.
And then I just happened to be one of the few people who'd done a film. So it was like, oh, well, you've done a film. You know what you're doing. It's like, no, I don't.
Right.
But anyway. So I will have to say the second film, working with George Miller, is where I learned everything about film.
Nice.
Yeah, because he educates, whereas Alex Proyas just would give you a script and go and do that. And I think once he said, oh, do you know what a Dutch tilt is? Oh, you don't? Okay. Piss it. Anyway, it's Jeremy's turn.
Jeremy, I think you have something in common.
I've got the handoff.
Mark Sexton's story, don't you?
Well, it's with both kind of in a way.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, mine was also what I would consider to be quite a circuitous. Is that how you pronounce that word? Route in that I went to college right after high school. I was 3 years at Humber College in Toronto for jazz trombone. So that was what for some reason, I decided out of high school. My parents were very proud. They were like, "Oh yeah, my son's going to be a professional jazz trombonist." Of course he is. I didn't scare them at all. Anyways, long story short, I was a hobbyist as far as the trombone went, as far as it goes, and I was always drawing instead of practicing, basically. I think with a lot of us, I mean, I wanted to get into comics when I was in high school and stuff like that, so I was drawing. I had my own superheroes and stuff like that, blah, blah, blah. Sent out a couple of submissions to various comic book companies, was working on my comic book art and also going to school for music at the same time. As I said, my parents were very, very proud and very supportive, actually, without any real irony. They were actually very supportive. My brother was already an engineer, so I was good to go. So I was at Humber College, and a bunch of musician friends of mine basically had a little jazz fusion band that they had, and they wanted to apply for a grant to get a music video made, and they needed storyboards to present as part of the grant. And so they came up to me and they were just like, "Hey, you're drawing all the time. Would you like to do some storyboards?" And now very similarly to Mark's, I guess at this point, is that like my knowledge back then, this was like 91. So like my knowledge of storyboards was very limited. I think there was a book called From Star Wars to Indiana Jones, and it says this George Lucas Spielberg thing and there's a bunch of boards in the back of that. And that was really my knowledge of it at that point.
Yes.
So I said I'd do it because, again, to go with the thing, can I do it? Yes, I can. So I basically went to the library because, again, the internet wasn't really a thing at the time. So I went to the library, took out a book called Shot by Shot, which is like a really sort of comprehensive, very beginner guide to filmmaking. And there's a really good section on storyboarding on it. And so I kind of taught myself how to do it badly, but well enough to be able to put these boards together. And so I did that, packaged them off, got paid for that. It wasn't really my first gig yet, but the director of that was the first camera operator on another music video that was getting shot, and they needed some boards, so they brought me in, and I was working on that, and I got kind of handed off one sort of little tiny, not really job to another, and then I ended up working on a very small independent film in Toronto where they were paying me like literally like $100 a week. And whenever I could work, I would work, and I would try to piece together some stuff for them. I was on that for about 6 months. Now, concurrent to this, it's a bit of a roundabout story. Some friends of mine from Humber College, one of them's having his 30th birthday. I get invited to that. And at this dinner is an actual, honest to God, assistant art director on an actual movie productions and TV shows and stuff. And we're talking, we're shooting the dirt, and I don't know
you
if
can
I
swear
can on this.
You can swear. That's fine.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool. Because I tend to.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we're talking, and I'm letting her know what I'm doing, and just we're doing the storyboarding things. And again, nothing really comes of it. But then about 3 months later, she gives me a call. She's just started on a show called Witchblade for the TNT network, based on a very popular comic book. And she's like, look, we've gone through like 4 storyboard artists. We've interviewed about 4 storyboard artists in town here, and they're all kind of flaky, and the showrunner doesn't like any of them. And you said you were doing some work. Can you come in? Right. And I was like, yeah, sure. So I just basically put everything that I had together into a portfolio and brought it, and just kind of sat down with this guy, whose name was Ralph Hemaker, who was the showrunner on Witchblade. And he looked through my stuff. He said, yeah, this is good. I mean, I feel pretty confident that I could draw at that point, and that my storyboarding was coming along. And so he was like, yeah, this is good. I mean, I think you'll do. And then we basically sat there for about 45 minutes and just talked about comic books. It's, like Dark Knight Returns and all this stuff that we both loved. And we really bonded in that short period of time. And he hired me right there on the spot. And he said, look, now, first of all, there was a full-time position on a TV show for TNT, which I didn't realize at the time, which was a ridiculous job. Now, they didn't pay me a lot, but it was roughly equal to the IKEA paycheck that I was making driving a forklift every week. So I was like, yeah, I'm in. Let's do it. Right. So I quit that job, came on to this. Anyways, but his selling point, and the real selling point that really benefited me, was just like, he's like, look, full time, not all these directors are going to need boards. There's only going to be 1 or 2 things per episode that you're going to need to board, but you're always going to be here, and there's always going to be stuff going on downstairs in the studio. So go down there, hang out with the directors, ask your questions, find out what the deal is, go from department, teach yourself. He says, if you do this right, in the next 8 months that we're shooting this season of this television series, you're going to learn more than you will in 3 years of film school. And I think that that's pretty accurate, because I really learned a lot about how to, like, just the very basics of storyboarding, first of all, but also how to communicate with the director. And not only that, but how to communicate with director A. And then 8 days later, director B comes in, and you have to deal with a completely different personality.
Yeah.
I used to love it. James Whitmore Sr. would come in, James Whitmore Jr. Would come in as a director every now and again. And he'd be like, I don't know, I don't use storyboards. Just go and draw whatever you want. Right. And so I'd be like, okay. He's like, so he'd like let me focus on a couple of scenes, and then I'd bring them to them. He goes, yeah, these are great. I'm not shooting these, but these are great. But those were great episodes, because, like, I guess I got to talk to him, and I got to, those were the days where I'd go down and I'd talk to the camera operators, and I watched them work and all that stuff. So that was a really, like, as far as like first real jobs goes, that was pretty great. And then it went down for season 1, and I did another little show in between. And one of the ADs went on to another show, and then it came back, and season 2 of Witchblade fell apart through no fault of my own. But
you had launched your career at that point. You're off and running.
Yeah, at that point, basically, I mean, I probably spent the next 5 or 6 years, like, sort of in varying degrees of full and part-time driving forklift and doing storyboards and stuff. And then I ended up sort of more of a full-time thing. And then when I moved to Vancouver from Toronto, that's when everything really kind of exploded for me. So
do you feel like a lot of your work was word of mouth from that point on? Or did you end up having to go find a rep and just sort of establish yourself throughout the community?
it was pretty much mostly, I would say almost all word of mouth, actually. Yeah.
Nice.
So I've never worked with an agent or a rep or anything like that. I've always just sort of, I'm not sure. It doesn't feel like it's really a thing up in Canada. Like there's not really, that doesn't exist up here. Like Mark mentioned Storyboards Inc. earlier, and I was just like, I actually reached out to them, and they were just like, oh, we prefer local talent. Or whatever. I don't remember what that was so long ago that they were able to sort of guide me, but they weren't really able to help me. Like they weren't able to represent me because I lived in Canada, basically, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so I managed to somehow, a couple of those connections on the pre-Witchblade thing actually did get me into some commercial work and stuff like that. And then I had one commercial producer that would call me basically every couple of months, and that was nice. And yeah, so basically one thing led to another for almost every job leading up to the present, really. I mean, it's it can all be sort of traced back, sort of like Kevin Bacon, all the way down through back to Witchblade. Yeah. So
I guess I'll chime in here with my little story. So I went to film school. I went to USC Film School, and surprisingly, unless you were in the animation arm, there are three arms. There was production, writing, and animation. Those are the three ones: production, animation, writing. And unless you were in animation, you were not taught anything about storyboarding. They mentioned it. They mentioned about how, Alfred Hitchcock, used storyboards, and so I became aware of it at that point. But up until then, I had no idea, like you guys, what storyboarding was, which is kind of funny. It's that hidden art, right? Like none of us really know. So when I graduated, this is, USC's in LA. I wanted to move back to where I grew up, which is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Because at that time, and Mark, I was giving you a hard time for being old, but I'm, almost as old as you are. So this is like I graduated in the early 90s. That was the time when Pittsburgh actually was up and coming. People were starting to film a lot of movies there. And so I would go out with my portfolio. I just created my own, storyboard portfolio. And I did it in like a 3-ring binder sort of thing. And I would glue them in on these. It looked terrible, but it got the point across. And I never got a job, surprisingly. And I would show up in like a suit and tie. It was horrible. Like I didn't know what I was doing. Yeah, well, that was part of it too. Like I'm a young kid out of school. I don't know what the hell I'm doing.
Right.
And so but I must have made somewhat of an impression on one of the producers, because eventually I did get a call, and he was working with James Webb. And James Webb, he was a U.S. Senator from Virginia, and he was also the Secretary of the Navy under Ronald Reagan. But he was more importantly, he was a Vietnam vet, and he wrote a book. It was a bestseller book called Fields of Fire. And James he was trying to get this book turned into a feature film. So the producer, now this is where things kind of get a little cloudy. I think I was so anxious to have my first professional gig, I didn't really pay attention to the terms. And I can't even remember, honestly, if it was written or if it was just a verbal agreement. But I got myself in trouble. So I had to drive down from Pittsburgh to Washington, D.C. to meet with James Webb. He gave me the script. He gave me a bunch of photos that he had taken during his time in Vietnam. The script was really good, by the way, and it's a shame it never got made. But and hopefully it's not any fault of mine. But I worked on the film for many, many months. I pretty much boarded the entire script, and I did a lot of it in really detailed thumbnails. And then now it came time to get paid. And I remember sending in my invoices, and the producer either I think he called me to discuss this and was like, hey, what are you doing? I'm like, well, this is what we agreed on as like a weekly. He's like, no, that wasn't weekly. That was like for the entire script. I'm like, what? Like what? I think it was like $1,000 or $1,200 or something. And I'd worked 3 or 4 months on this thing. And I'm like, I knew better, at least in terms of like, I knew what real storyboard artists were getting at that time. And I knew that was like, they were really cheaping out. So I think in the end, he did end up giving me a little bit more, but I learned a really hard lesson that day to, not jump into a project without getting all the details cleared first and having everything written. and explained in detail. So now, like, actually, on the commercial gigs, I don't know how you guys work. If you get a commercial, do you actually have a contract? Because I don't.
No, I don't.
Okay.
No, there's generally no time.
What about movie gigs?
Yeah, no.
Yeah, I got
contracts on movies.
I do the short forms. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you call it contracting.
Yeah,
you
or deal memo.
Type of thing,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just curious. But that's a lesson to anyone out there who's starting out, is definitely do not, unless you're willing to work for free and you know that up front, or for very, very little, but otherwise make sure you have everything spelled out in detail in a contract before you move into actually doing any of the work. So,
absolutely.
There you go. Yeah. Shane, do you have a first gig story that you'd like to share with us?
It's kind of a mix of a couple first gigs, to be honest. My first storyboarding gig was while I was working at Take-Two Interactive, and Lance was brought on to actually direct a opening sequence for a full motion video game called Black Dahlia. And I'd never storyboarded before, and I was doing all the concept design and basically visual, building a visual library for the entire 3D team. And so for whatever reason, he didn't have time to board it, and he had given me a copy of Shot by Shot, the book. And
Stephen Katz.
That's how I learned. And I'd been an avid film buff, since I was a real small child. And so I was pretty versatile in seeing, the shots and knowing, how they worked, and having grown up on comics, all that was pretty easy to understand. So I did that one, and then I was like, I never really thought of it as a career per se, but when I wanted to leave, get out of Pittsburgh, I was heading out west, and I was trying to get in as a compositor, because I heard they were making a lot of money, doing films and stuff. But
Flame and Flint, yeah,
Flame and Flint back at the time,
yeah,
and I had learned it at Take-Two a little bit, and so I ended up doing a lot of interviewing at Blue Sky VFX and Digital Domain and all these other film studios. And at every twist and turn, I'd hand in a reel, and they'd be like, this is, you'd only make about $45,000, and you'd be doing wire removal or smoke or something really not creative at all. And I was like, God, this is terrible. And so somebody said, hey, you should go over to Columbia TriStar. They're hiring for Men in Black and a couple other animated shows that they were doing. And I'm like, well, I've never considered doing animation.
So that was the 2D animated Men in Black or the movie?
Yeah. And
the animated, okay.
This was like 97, 98, something like that. And I go over there, and I remember going in the building, and they had like, the place was packed. They had artists in every corner of the studio, even in the stairwell where, they were probably breaking some fire codes. And I go up and I meet with I think the producer or the director, and he said, no, let me see your portfolio. And I was like, okay. So I was showing him some stuff, and I didn't have any real storyboards other than the stuff I did with Lance. And he's like, the drawing's pretty good. And then we got interrupted by somebody, and this person came in, and they had a stack of storyboards. It was like, I don't know, 300 pages worth of storyboards. And it's all in blue pencil. And I'm like, oh, this is like the first time I'm seeing professional boards. And he hands it to the guy, and the guy's just like flipping through it. And he's like he's like, yeah, this is all shit. Have him do it over. And it was like, oh no, what did I do? And so I was like, oh boy, I'm not going to be able to hang with these guys. And he's like, I think Saban's hiring for the Avengers or something. So why don't you go over there? Because I had a lot of superhero stuff in my portfolio. I was running out of time, and I never ended up going to Saban Entertainment. But so when I moved out to Seattle, I'd worked in video games doing storyboards, and that's all digital. So you're not really working with live action. But the first gig I ended up getting was, in a weird way, I was at a comic convention showing my books and my art, and another storyboard artist came up to my table, and I had heard his name before. So when he introduced himself, I'm like, oh, you're the other storyboard artist in Seattle. And kind of much like Mark Sexton, there was only like 2 or 3 of us doing any storyboards in the entire city. on a regular basis. And so, we chatted, and maybe a year or so later, I ended up getting a call from a local agency. They were looking for somebody to do storyboards for T-Mobile. There was commercials that they were trying to do for the web, and Tom Price at the time just couldn't take the work. He was doing too much work, and I was like, oh well, must be nice. So that kind of kicked it off, and I was like really nervous because everything I had learned, I basically had learned through video games and, through studying, Hitchcock books and other film books. And so I go into the studio to figure out, okay, well, what's it like to talk to a director? Because I've never really actually had to talk to anybody, and I don't know what the personalities are, and who, what the protocol is. And so I show up, and the director and the producer and all the other heads of the departments are in this meeting. And, everyone was super cool, but the director definitely he was the alpha male. He had the room, he had the attention of everybody. And it was just kind of like, just hang on, try to focus. And, everything was a blur, but it was just like, okay, I'm taking my notes and doing the best I can. And then he just gives me, it's not really a full script. It's more like an outline, of beats. And so I'm actually working on site, which is also uncomfortable because I've always been working in my studio. So that's what I ended up doing. I just did the boards there, and he's kind of like standing there, or he would check in with me, looking over my shoulder. And it was one of those things where I'm not used to having somebody like right there. But it worked out, and that just kind of kicked it off. I kept doing a lot of commercials for them, and I just kept doing commercials for the next 10 years.
All right. So now let's move into, let's say our audience members, there might be some out there who are looking to get into doing storyboarding. So what advice might you give them to land that first gig? And then let's say once they land that first paying gig, what advice might you give them when they show up for their first day of work, sort of like what Shane was talking about? And especially if you're not used to working with a director and you're not exactly sure what the protocol is, and you don't want to do the wrong thing and embarrass yourself and ruin it for the rest of your life, essentially. So does anyone have any advice that they want to start off with?
I think we probably all have advice.
Okay.
We've all been through it.
Yeah.
I'll kick it off if you want.
Don't do it.
But it is a little, we should preface it by saying we're all roughly the same age, which means we did all get in, we broke in at a long time ago, probably, 25, 30 years ago. And so things have definitely changed, obviously, with the internet and technology, and now artificial intelligence, which is a threat. So it's probably not going to be the same, definitely, as when we broke in, but we'll try and adjust our advice to accommodate all the
My
new
advice will work
technologies
right
and
now.
everything. Okay, let's hear it, Mark.
And it's different than what most people think about. One thing, because I talk a lot at universities and higher level education, and one of the things I always tell them is get involved in the industry. And what I mean by that is join groups, whether it's women in film, which accepts men, it's not just for women, but it's to promote women. Women in animation, there's writers groups, there's all sorts of, there's visual effects groups, VES is a really great group. Join a few of them, but don't be a wallflower. Offer to work their live events, because everything we do is based on who we know, right? We all get work because of people who know us, know what we do, and then recommend us to somebody, or they hire us themselves. So how do you get to know these people? You get to know them by working for free at these events, which are generally going to be on a weekend or some night, so it shouldn't really affect your general life. And what I recommend to people is offer to work the sign-in table. And there's two reasons. One, you meet every single person coming in. And every single person coming to these events is a potential job connection for you. But your work is also over by the time the event starts. So now you can go and enjoy the event, and you already know who you want to go talk to because you've already met everyone coming in. Now, if you're showing up and you've got a great attitude and you're not being paid, and they know what you want to do, and they're going to know what you want to do because you're going to be smart and tell people, hey, I'm a story artist, and, good to meet you, right? If you do a great job and show up when it's free, if they've got something coming up, they're going to trust you that you're also going to show up because you're going to get paid. You will get right into the industry immediately if you do that.
So what about people who don't live in LA or New York or Chicago or Atlanta or, any of those cities that might have these types of events?
There's film festivals unless you're in bumfuck somewhere, there's going to be an association that you can get to. And the second thing is move. If you're not in an area with production, don't stay there. You're only going to get work if you're living in a city where there's production. Move. I was raised in Houston. It's a big city. I moved to LA. The week after I graduated college, I was living in LA. So be smart. Be where the production is. There's no excuses. But do it when you're young, because it's very easy to be poor in Los Angeles or any big city when you're young.
Yeah.
You can't do it when you're married with kids.
True.
Right. And need health insurance.
Exactly. Yeah. Do it young. Advice. And if you decide you don't like it, great. You've already tried it, but don't say what if.
Okay.
Right.
Oh, that's the unique approach, Mark. I like that. Mark Sexton, do you have any advice that you might offer someone?
I mean, I agree with Mark 100% about being present and putting yourself out there. I mean, I think that was the most important thing. I mean, that's how I got into it, by doing something unnecessary because I love doing it, which was the comics, and that led inadvertently to film. But yeah, it is the process of putting yourself out there and showing people what you're capable of doing. When I was at university, there was no film industry in Melbourne. It was all in Sydney. So I moved to Sydney, and that's how that worked. I mean, I've just had the advantage that because there was only a few people doing storyboarding in Sydney, I didn't really have to start looking for work after that. But these days, I mean, one of the biggest things I always say is you're talking to people like ourselves as well, letting everybody else letting people who are doing the similar things to what you're doing know what you're capable of doing, because at some point or another, we're all going to have those jobs where we can't do it. And if we know of people who are responsible and can deliver, and are enthusiastic about flaky, then we're likely to put their names out there. But it's still up to the individual whether they do get the work. You've got to try and make the effort. I do see a lot of people who seem to think that it's once they've done a little bit of work, it's going to fall into their lap. And it's just going to happen for them, and then they stop trying. And I think that's the biggest mistake you can possibly make. You don't deserve it; you have to work to deserve it. And once you do that and show people you're actually legitimately interested, and I think the other big thing that and I think this is a really important note for everybody, is take the ego out of it. You've got to take it. I find storyboarding has to be an almost egoless job in a lot of ways. You are providing a service to a production, to a director, to a producer, or whoever you're working for. You're doing something that they need, not what you need. You get what you need out of it, which is money and hopefully a good reputation. But you have to go in realizing that what you're doing is trying to make someone else's life easier. And so I think
make them look good.
It's a real attitude adjustment. And I think find very much with people who are starting now that's the biggest hurdle they have to jump. True. It's not about you. It's about the people who you're trying to work for. And
that's when my career exploded, when I realized that. Absolutely.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Like these are drawings that you're doing for another person or for another organization. This is not your art.
Right.
I mean, if you're lucky enough, you're able to put some of your art into it, but this is not what I do for fun. This is not what I do for my own, expression artistically. It's not that far off. But but when I'm drawing, it's not necessarily the same type of thing that I'm doing. Like the shortcuts that we take when we're doing boards, and the little tricks and tips and stuff that we would never do if we're doing like that sort of piece that comes from the heart. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So of all the different qualities that a storyboard artist must have, let's say obviously artistic talent, ability to show up and to be able to get along with them easily and being consistent and on time. Is there a way to rank?
Those are the smallest things.
Okay, let's hear some more qualities.
Knowing everything about film.
Okay.
That's the biggest one, obviously.
True.
Yeah, you got to know
I would say like,
although a lot of you guys managed to get in without knowing much about film.
I mean, I mean, for myself, I was lucky enough to learn a lot about. I mean, I always loved film, right? So, I mean, I'd seen a lot of the sort of the library of all the great classic stuff, and that's obviously to my benefit. But I learned it on the job, which I'm very lucky to be able to to say.
Yeah, not many people can 100%.
Say that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well,
I'd say aside. No, go ahead, Mark.
I was going to say I studied film, so I was also shooting things, so I understood the difference between a long lens and a short lens, which a DP will say you damn well better know how to draw that. But having been an art director for years in Hollywood, I was on set all the time. So when I started doing the boards of a stunt, I knew how to hide the crash pads or how to hide this and how to hide the impact of a fist, and because of paying attention to things. So, luckily now everyone has behind the scenes videos, the really good ones, the making of. Watch all of that. That's the best film school you can go to.
I mean, I remember like back in the day, like, I mean, like the behind the scenes stuff that I had access to there was like an ABC special of the making of Raiders of the Lost Ark that I watched when I was like 8. You know what I mean? That was it. And then, if I wasn't lucky enough to have taped it, then that was it. It was gone in and out. You know what I mean? So there's so many resources that are out there right now. There's YouTube channels. There's just, it's there. So take advantage of that and just like make sure that you're using all of these tools that most of us didn't have at the time that we were trying to start off. Like, you know what I mean? It's there. Use it.
Ironically, for me, the first gig I got was literally the director said, and this is his briefing, I use comic book artists because they don't know about film.
Oh, interesting.
That's really
so
interesting.
they will break all the rules and they'll come up with something interesting that no one else would have done because they know too much. So
that's
that was
an
great
interesting way of looking at it.
That was great for him. And then
then you go on to your next job, and the next guy's like, "What the fuck is this?"
Exactly. What's this low end?
Exactly.
I would say, and if I could just sort of one more little segment to sort of add on top of that, I would say the number 2 for me is definitely just like clear, concise communication. Being able to communicate with just about everybody that you come across. We say earlier, the answer is always yes. So can you do this? The answer is always yes. But when you're in it, when you're actually doing the process, if you don't know, then ask. So that you don't walk away from that meeting going, I don't know what I'm doing now. Like the ability to humble yourself again, to be able to ask the things that you don't know, while obviously presenting yourself with the confidence that of course you can do it even so. So find balance. Yeah.
I think I would go ahead and add that, people getting themselves ready to present themselves as storyboard artists, I think it's important that they have not just one set of storyboards, that it's all action all the time. They should have quiet moments. They should have action moments. They should have potential comedy moments. I think when it's almost like dress for the job you want. If you want to get into animation, do animation boards. If you want to get into live action, do live action boards. And also getting involved, kind of like what you were saying, Mark, Simon, that getting involved in filmmaking is just as important as anything. Being a PA, being on set, seeing how the director communicates with the DP, and then hearing that language over and over again, then you can go back and find whatever resource that you need to get better at your craft. And then that way you're able to talk to a director and not hear it for the first time and hear all that lingo, that there's a lot of that taxonomy that gets lost when they're saying, here's a cowboy shot. And when the first time I heard a cowboy shot, I was like, I was thinking of Sergio Leone. I was thinking of High Noon. I'm like, what the fuck are they saying? Cowboy shot. Eventually, I went away and found that out. I just nodded and say, oh, yeah, cowboy shot.
I did the same thing with that one, yeah.
Well, you were on the right track. That's where the cowboy shot did come from. So they could show the holsters.
The holsters, exactly, yeah.
You
know, Shane, one thing you said, though, is worth kind of building on when you're talking about if you want to do animation samples. But if you want to storyboard 2D animation, two things I'm going to say. One, do not do samples in anime, which almost every story artist kid is drawing anime. And there's no anime productions in the United States or Canada.
Right.
So don't do that. That won't help you. Second, find the kind of shows that you want to do, and you have to do it with those characters on model to prove that you can draw those characters on model, meaning looking like the finished character. Right. Because your storyboards are going to go overseas, and if your storyboards are off model, the animation is going to be off model. So you have to have different styles to show that you can match the style of different shows.
Absolutely.
In live action, it doesn't matter. It just can't be cartoony. It has to be comic book or realistic, like Neil Adams to kind of look in essence. But we don't have a particular style.
If you can do likenesses, that can also be a plus when you're doing commercials. That was the thing I ran into more so than in live action film, is that, hey, if you can make someone look like that person, then all the better.
I try to do my best with that, just because the fewer questions you leave the people with, because it's amazing to me, and I don't mean to, I'm not speaking badly of any particular people, but the number of people who are involved in the film business who are not visual thinkers is mind-boggling to me sometimes. So the clearer and the more precise that you can make your drawings, the better, which, obviously we don't have a lot of time to do. So
that's the purpose of what we're doing, though, is to answer questions. So yeah, absolutely.
I was just going to say, I think we would all agree also, and this is not something that's really thought of when someone is trying to start off doing storyboards, is that the actual drawing, your ability to draw, I mean, you should be able to draw, right? We all agree. But it doesn't have to be the most beautiful storyboards. It doesn't have to be the most detailed. You have to be able to communicate your drawing so that everyone understands. It has to be clear, right? I mean, the challenge is to be able to do a drawing in the least amount of strokes as possible and still get the information across. That is what we're all striving for, I think. And so people who are trying to draw every single little detail, and I'm completely guilty of this because I do it myself.
I'm terrible.
And I'm trying to find it depends on how much time I have, right? It's always the fault of the production. If I have a lot of time, I'm going to end up, adding a lot of detail. If I have no time, then I do really rough, quick sketches, and I always like those better. Because I like the energy that's in them. There's just enough information in them to get everything across. So anyway, that's something I think it's important to mention to people who are looking to build their portfolios. And a lot of people
have a mix of both.
Yeah, you can have a mix of both, because usually for where they use more detailed storyboards is whenever they're pitching something like an advertising.
Right.
So let's say an advertising agency, is hired by a large corporation. Let's use Coke or whoever, Pepsi as an example. That advertising agency is then tasked with coming up with, at least 3 or so concepts that they have to pitch back to Coke or Pepsi to see which one they're going to choose. And usually those pitch boards are more detailed. A lot of times they're in color. So if that's what you want to do, although to be honest, I think pitch boards are more subject to being eliminated or less used now because of artificial intelligence. It's much easier.
We've lost 100% of ours. Yeah.
Yeah, it's much easier because close enough is good enough in the pitch world. When you're doing shooting boards, it's much different. AI is still not there, I don't think, for shooting boards because things are so specific in terms of composition, lenses, like we talked about, depth of field, all that stuff. When you're working with a director, and I'm sure we've probably all worked with directors who have tried going the AI route, and then they end up coming back to you because they got so frustrated they couldn't get what they wanted. Yeah. So anyway, does anyone have any particular stories? I'm curious with maybe a director you're working with who tried using AI in place and then came back to you.
I've been lucky enough not to have that happen yet. I'm looking forward to my first one.
Okay.
No.
Or at least not that you know.
Yeah, well, fair.
I had a director who thought I was too expensive and said, I'm going to go find someone cheaper. And I said, okay, I'm not lowering my rate. Go ahead. And 2 weeks later, he came back, said, yeah, it didn't work out with the cheaper people. It's like, yeah, I know.
That's happened to me.
Yeah, I think it's happened to all of us. I did the same thing on a film. I worked for 6 months of the film, did half the film, and then the director said, it's not going fast enough. You go and do something else. I'm getting 4 people in to get this other stuff done in a month. And 6 months later, he came back and went, can you do it?
Yeah.
And you sit there just going, oh, yeah. It's learning. It's learning who you're working with, learning their tricks, learning how they think, and being in tune with that sort of stuff. And that's 90% of the job is knowing how they think.
And to that point, Mark, one of the things that I always do before I start, still to this day, before I start working on a new project, which Lance goes back to kind of the last question you asked anyway, is if it's a director I've never worked with before, I go and I find a movie or TV show that they've done recently, and I study their style of directing, how they like to balance a frame, how they like to move the camera, how they put things together. So when I start sketching with them, I'm instantly drawing in the way that they like to frame and set up their shots. And they're always like, oh my God, you're 100%. Getting me right away. Well, it's because I studied them.
Yeah, that's real smart. You know, Lance, I was going to add something real quick, is that when you were talking about show boards or production boards versus shooting boards, I think when it comes to portfolios, I think having at least 3 sets of boards where you're showing shooting boards, when you're showing production boards or pitch boards, and then and also understanding like how long each of those types of boards take you to do. So when you can communicate to the director or producer, oh yeah, I can do 15 to 20 boards a day, and they're like, of the pitch boards or the, you got to know that, because when you have to start calculating price and how long it's going to take you, that you have all that information on that first job that you get.
Something I would suggest that people learn to draw, because you don't have to be the best artist to be a storyboard artist, but if you don't have perspective down, then it's really going to be a bad situation, let's say, because
it won't work.
Perspective, it won't work. Yeah, perspective is so important in the filmmaking process, and you have to be able to draw from almost any angle too. So practice drawing low angles, practice drawing high angles, practice moving your vanishing point all around and drawing different perspectives, not just buildings and cars, but people too. You have to be able to draw people in perspective. Foreshortening, when someone's hand is reaching out in the front toward the camera. That was the
hardest thing for me to learn, was foreshortening.
Foreshortening, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things to practice that, it all goes, like, as a storyboard artist, a lot of people say you have to draw everything, and it is true. I mean, you are, you can rely on reference. We all do. We all have, the first thing I do after I get off a call is I start looking for reference. I start looking for, there are some like very, very rare people who can draw anything out of their head, but it's like maybe 3 people on planet Earth.
I'll take it a step further. I'll try to draw as little as possible in my boards these days. If I need to draw a car, I'll find a 3D model of it. I'll put it through a filter in Photoshop. I'll plop that in there. This is an art that's going out for publication. This is
exactly.
a tool. So I don't think I've drawn a car in about 4 years. I mean,
I do the same thing. 3D models. Yep.
Gotcha.
It just takes too long to draw a good car. I can just bring in a 3D model and move it around. I'm done.
Put it through poster edges, and you're done.
True.
I've done 2 Mad Max films, and I hate drawing cars. Can I just say one thing though? We have been talking about the fact you can draw. You have to know how to draw everything, and you have to draw it from different angles, and you know how to draw highs and lows and worm eye views and all sort of stuff. However, in your first job, don't think that that's what you have to do when you're doing the boards.
Oh, right.
Because if you do that, that's what I did. And it's a classic mistake that I see happen time and time again. You overboard. You draw like, I drew like I was a comic book artist. Every panel had to be different because you wanted to keep the reader's attention. However, in film, you'd don't do that because that's going to drive everyone up the wall because then it's like, oh, set up over here, blah, blah, blah. Too much.
True.
You can
True.
overboard. So you have to have discipline within your storyboarding, and you don't need to try and show off.
Right.
And that's the lack of ego thing. That's
No. That's why
That's
those little opportunities that you can show off are so nice.
Yes.
Well, you can show off, but you can show off with discipline.
That's a really good point.
Do it when it's the right time.
Yeah. And that's when you listen to your director.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I'll take that a step further. Sometimes the best show off that you can do is to board specifically for the job that you're on. So, I mean, you board, I mean, I'm assuming we all board completely differently when we're on a big feature and we've got all the time in the world to craft and create this scene versus working on a show that's got an 8-day schedule and I got to get these things out so that they can shoot them. And I draw the most precise and shootable boards that I can give them in the most efficient way possible in those situations versus, you know, if I'm on something for Marvel, then they're just like, just do this one and see what you can come up with. I mean, where, you know, you're pulling ideas from out of wherever. So
yeah. And to kind of go off what Mark Sexton was saying in terms of like, you don't want to be too flashy. You also want to learn how to control the pacing of a film. And by being flashy, that means that you're not setting up your quiet moments to, you know, in anticipation of a surprise or a big moment. So you need to do those kind of more boring, slower shots as a build up to the impactful shot that's coming.
Yeah.
That's all part of filmmaking. But yeah, it is I would definitely recommend getting some books on filmmaking or watching videos these days. Yeah. Like Jeremy was saying, everything's on YouTube. When I went to school, the internet didn't exist. So I'm glad I did what I did, but if I had it to do over again and the internet was in existence, let's say today, I probably would not go to film school. I don't think I would recommend that. The only thing at film school I think is good for these days is discipline. It forces you because you have to show up for a class or you have to get a project done. Unless you're very self-disciplined and you can do it on your own, then do it on your own. Use your own money, save your money, for film school, apply it to either making your own film or at least, create I was going to say, even these days, I would recommend, and I don't like to recommend artificial intelligence, but in terms of like ChatGPT, if you're out there and thinking, okay, what can I storyboard? Like I'm not a writer. I don't have anything to storyboard. Well, you can either find someone who is a writer and ask them to storyboard their script that hasn't been produced yet. Or I would just, go into ChatGPT and explain exactly what you're going to do and have it write a script and then say, okay, now break these down into shots for me. Or you can break it down yourself into shots and then storyboard that. At least that gives you something. If you're not a writer and you need something to draw and you don't know what that is, at least do that. That's going to help you build your portfolio. And you could, you can do an action scene, like Shane was saying. You could do a commercial where you're featuring a product. You could do a pitch board, that sort of thing. So there are lots of ways, if you're disciplined and you really want to do this for a living, that, you can go out and do it. And you don't necessarily need film school to do it for you.
Right.
So
I agree with that. And I've got a quick little commercial. So the book I wrote, Storyboards, Motion, and Art, has 5 exercises in the back with scripts and breakdowns in different levels that really are just like what the different types of things you're likely to run into. And I know people use it because I'll see at my studio, I'll see story artists sending in their samples based on the exercises in my book.
Very good. That's a great resource. All right, guys, I think that's a great point to wrap this up. I want to thank all of you guys for joining us today. We really appreciate your time that you dedicate to this. Mark Sexton, have a happy Monday.
I'll do my best. I'll let you know how it goes.
Yeah. Thank you very much to our audience for joining us and for watching this. If you guys would, please try and get the word out that this podcast exists. If you enjoyed it, get it out to your other storyboard friends who you think would find it helpful. We really would appreciate your help. Okay, until next month, thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you then. Thanks for watching.